Good morning, seventh grade. Let's go ahead and let's get started with today's lesson. Rather brief one, so it'll be a nice kind of Thursday wrap up and then kind of enjoy Friday and then the weekend. So let's get busy now. I want to get started with chapter 1, lesson 6. Kind of got carried away there. Originally was a 7, turned that into a 6. Multiplying and dividing real numbers. And I want to move kind of quick, guys, through this lesson because a lot of it is things that you should already know. And with that being said, we have our multiplication and division rules. And we all know that when we multiply two positives, it equals a positive. We should know that when we multiply two negatives, we also get a positive. And the last way, whenever we kind of mix things up, we do a positive times a negative. Well, that's when we end up with negative answers then. So this is kind of big key for this lesson. And as long as you know this rule, which you should, then you should do fairly well with lesson 6. So let's get started. So with number 1, we have 12 times negative 8. Well, I've got a positive times a negative. That's going to result in a negative answer. And then 12 times 8, that's 96. So my answer is going to be 96. Something new that you may not be familiar with or have seen often is whenever we write multiplication, we can write it simply by writing the numbers right next to one another and then being separated through a parentheses. So we've got the method of using a dot. We can write things side by side, and then also using that X, the multiplication symbol. So a couple of ways of showing multiplication. Let's move ahead. Number 2. So I've got 24 times 0.5. Well, I'm really doing half of 24. So 24 times 0.5 is 12. It's a positive times a positive, so it's going to stay a positive 12. Again, kind of moving kind of quick through these. And it's real numbers, guys, so that's going to deal with whole numbers, positive, negative. It's going to deal with decimals. And also number 3, we see fractions. So I've got negative 3/4 times 1/2. And remember, with fractions, we just simply multiply straight across. Now, it is a positive times a negative. So my answer is going to be negative. However, when we multiply straight across, I do 3 times 1, 3, 4 times 2, 8. I'm going to leave it just like so because 3 divided by 8, you cannot simplify any more. So my answer is going to be negative 3/8. Now, the next two questions, guys, these are going to be the ones that may be a little new to you, but if you think about it, it really makes sense. So if I have 3 squared, again, I think we've already talked about this, but that's the same as writing 3 times 3. So 3 squared would be 9. What if I had negative 3 squared? What would negative 3 squared be? Well, ask yourself again, okay, what does that mean? What does negative 3 squared mean? Well, guys, it means negative 3 times negative 3. It's the same thing we did here on number 4. The only difference is on number 4, it was a positive 3, so 3 times 3, both positive. And on number 5, it's a negative 3, so negative 3 times negative 3. You still go through and multiply those out. Well, a negative times a negative is going to be like a positive. 3 times 3, 9. So you're going to get the answer 9 to both of those. So just be mindful of that. Kind of a general rule of thumb, anytime you square a negative, your answer is going to be positive. And that's because a negative times a negative creates a positive. All right, let's move ahead and let's move into this next section, which involves simplifying square roots. So when we simplify square roots, for example, here for number 6, I have negative square root of 25. Okay, well, what is the square root of 25? Well, the square root of 25 is going to be 5. I bring down my negative sign. So my answer for this one is going to be -5. Now this one's different from 4 and 5 in the aspect of, okay, if I square -5, I get 25. But my negative is actually on the outside of this square root, so it just kind of stays and carries down with what the square root of 25 is equal to. So it's almost like doing -1 times the square root of 25. So I don't want you to get real hung up on this one with that negative out front. You're really just simplifying the radical, which is 5, and then bringing down the negative sign with it. Now, always make sure, guys, when you're solving problems, the negative is outside the square root. If the negative were to be inside, that's when we get into more imaginary numbers, and that should be a red flag. And if you ever get a problem that is square root, and say it was wrote like this, stop what you're doing, email me. Maybe you're in the wrong section, or maybe you're looking at the wrong thing. This is not something we're going to be doing, okay? So always make sure that negative is on the outside. Number 7. So I want to find, now this is kind of a new concept as well. On number 7, we start to see plus or minus. And what that means is, the reason it's plus or minus is because, say I take the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4 is equal to 2. Well, the square root of 4, guys, can also be, well, whenever I take 2 squared, that's equal to 4. Well, what if I did -2 squared? That's also going to be equal to 4. So as you can see, both a positive and a negative, when I square them, equal the same thing. So by taking the square root of these, that's when we start to see this plus or minus come into effect, because both the positive and the negative forms squared are still going to give me that positive 4. So when I break this one down, I'm just going to continue to keep that plus or minus with my answer. So I'm going to continue with plus or minus, and that means that my answer could be positive or negative, whatever the number is the answer to this question. So whenever I break this down, I carry that plus or minus with it. I take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. So the square root of my numerator is going to be 2. Square root of my denominator is going to be 7. And that's because 2 times 2 is 4, 7 times 7 is 49. So this would actually be my answer. Anytime we have the square root of a fraction, just take the square root of the number on top, take the square root of the number on the bottom, and continue to write it as a fraction. And if you can simplify that fraction, go ahead and do so then. And then again, we're just going to leave that plus or minus symbol out front. And this is a big reason why we have that plus or minus. And that's because, again, that positive or negative 2 squared is still going to equal 4, okay? Let's move into number 8. So number 8 is very similar to number 7 in the aspect of we have the plus or minus, but it's different in it's not a fraction. It's just a whole number underneath the radical. So I'm going to simplify that radical. And when I simplify it, it's going to be equal to 4. And that's because 4 times 4 is equal to 16. And then again, I'm just going to continue by keeping that same sign out front. So plus or minus. And what that means is, again, 4 squared is 16, and -4 squared is also equal to 16. All right, let's look at one more problem, and this one again should be a review because I've already taught this concept to my 6th graders this year, and that is if I were to say that x is equal to -3/4, y was equal to -2/3, and I want to show x divided by y. What this problem is really asking you is if you took the first fraction as your numerator and you took the second fraction as your denominator. And then from there, I just want to solve them. Well, anytime that we have this fraction bar, that's the same thing as division. And when a lot of us, we should know that, because whenever we convert a fraction into a decimal, we have to divide. We do the long division, and then we carry things out. So this fraction bar, anytime you have the fraction bar, it just means you're doing division. So I'm doing negative 3/4 divided by negative 2/3. So I'm really just doing a fraction divided by a fraction. And anytime we have a fraction divided by a fraction, that's when we do our keep, change, flip. KCF. Keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep my first fraction as negative 3/4. I'm going to change division to multiplication. And I'm going to flip my second fraction into 3/2. Do not forget about the negative. There's a negative with that 2/3. So I want to make sure I keep that negative with my 3/2. I go through and I solve this problem then. A negative times a negative is going to create a positive. So I know my answer is positive. And I'm going to just multiply straight across. So 3 times 3 is 9. And 4 times 2 is 8. So my answer here is going to be 9/8. And I will take, guys, answers that are left improper, or if you want to simplify this one into 1 and 1/8, that works as well. So either one of these answers are acceptable. Guys, really kind of a quick lesson today. Not a whole lot to it. I think a lot of this is review, especially whenever we get into multiplying numbers. Just remember, guys, positive times a positive is a positive, negative times a negative, positive, and a positive times a negative is a negative. If you know that rule there, you should do very well in the first part of this lesson. Really kind of focus on the radicals. So again, all I did here is I just simplified my square roots, and then I kept the sign that was out front. And if you're wondering why you can have that plus or minus, positive 2 squared is 4, negative 2 squared is 4. So it really works where I'm going to need a plus and a minus, because both positive negative 2 is equal to 4. Okay, so that's why that works. And then the last part was our keep, change, flip. So don't forget your rules whenever we're solving keep, change, flip. A little surprise for you here this afternoon. I hope you guys are doing well. I bring up my dogs a lot during my videos. See if I can adjust my camera here. And Marlo. There's Marlo. There's Marlo. And hey, oh, he's upside down. There's Jeter. Say hi, Jeter. All right. So those are my dogs. You enjoyed them from all of our story problems. So if you guys have any questions, any comments, please let me know. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Thanks, guys.